Hi, thanks for coming, thanks for having me. I'll introduce myself because probably none of you know anything about me. My name is Jonathan. I've been involved in the Palestinian struggle for roughly 20 years now. I come from a city called Jaffa on the coast of Palestine. I've been a political prisoner several times throughout the last years, and have just very recently finished 1 year of between prison and house arrest, waiting to be tried, and I'm finally relatively free, so I can move around. What I'd like to talk about today is the situation in Palestine, the genocide that is taking place in Gaza as we speak, but also speak a little bit about the history, the context of everything that is happening beyond what is happening right now, and maybe perhaps a little bit about what I think can be done, and that maybe that can be a discussion more than me just speaking. I'd like to ask before I start that if I say something that isn't completely clear, if I use a term that maybe you're not familiar with or you don't understand, stop me and I'll try and explain, because what I think is obvious might not be obvious to some of you. And also, before I start, there are these pictures here, which might be a little bit hard to see, so you're welcome to come look at them afterwards. They're of a photographer, an independent photographer who's part of the Active Stills Collective, and they've been taken in Gaza over the past month. The photographer's name is Mohammed Zaanoun, and he had recently managed to escape Gaza into Egypt. We've just spoken to him yesterday, and every time we speak, what he conveys is a sense of urgency that someone who hasn't lived through the genocide could never convey, that I could never convey back to you. So I'd like to open this by repeating his words of the experience, as best as I can, of the experience that he had experienced in the past months. He is originally from Gaza City in the north. And in the first days of the war, the house adjacent to his house was bombed with a 1-ton missile, with a 1-ton bomb. It caused his house to collapse, the walls of his house to collapse as well, over the beds of his children who were sleeping in their beds as the bombs fell, as the walls collapsed. He dug his children from under the rubble, and they ran away, started to run away south, as the Israeli army called on people to run away south to safe areas. Since then, he had moved 6 times inside the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is just a little bit larger than 300 square kilometers. It's very, very small. They've had to move from one place of refuge to another 6 times as the Israeli bombs followed them. When we spoke, not yesterday, the time before, he was in Rafah, the southmost town in Gaza, and he said, "We have no food, we have no water, there is no shelter. We are constantly hungry, we are constantly thirsty. There is no place to rest, there's no place to take a shower. Our lives are not worth living. And he said that with an urgency of having to leave. One of the reasons that he had to leave is because he's a journalist, and journalists have been specifically targeted during this war. Journalists have been specifically targeted during this war. So one of the results of that is that he could not find a place to stay. Literally, people would be afraid, his relatives would be afraid to host him because bombs follow journalists. So people would be unsafe, would feel unsafe simply by hosting him. He could not raise his tent next to other people because they would be unsafe simply for being his neighbors. And when we spoke yesterday, he was in Egypt. He managed to get away. And part of what he felt very lucky, but he also felt very guilty for having left Gaza. And that has to do with Zionist and Palestinian history of dispossession. And to start that off, I'd like us to go back to the beginning of the previous century, the beginning of the 20th century, where the Zionist movement starts gaining momentum, and its founding ethos as a colonial movement. And in those years, it was not considered shameful to be a colonialist movement, and the Zionist movement actually called itself a colonialist movement. But its founding ethos was a people without a land for a land without a people. The people without a land were the Jews, were the Jewish people, and the land without the people was Palestine. Now, of course, there were people in Palestine at the time. There were Palestinians, but they were not white. So in the best traditions of colonialism, they were not really considered people. And Zionism, from its very beginning, was a movement concerned with the movement of white people, mostly European people, into non-European lands for their dispossession and eventual replacement. In 1947, after many years of ongoing struggle between Zionist colonialism and the indigenous Palestinian population, the UN decides to end the British mandate over Palestine. At that time, there was after the First World War, there was a British mandate over Palestine to manage that land, and the UN decided to split Palestine into two countries, into two states, a Jewish one and an Arab one. And the UN allocated more than 50% of the land to between 30 to 20% of the population which was Jewish. Now, that decision, of course, was taken against the will of the majority of the people of the land, who were Palestinians, and opposed a Jewish-only state on the majority of their lands. Following that decision, a war broke out, which eventually culminated in what is known today as the Palestinian Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, with the removal of over 700,000 Palestinians, turning them into refugees. Many of them fleeing to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank, and some of them were internally displaced, and many of them also fled to Gaza. What is known today as the Gaza Strip is not actually what historically is known as the Gaza district. It is a much smaller space, much smaller stretch of land than what is historically, than what was the Gaza district historically. In the war, Israel occupied a much larger area than the one that was designated to it under the UN decision. And in it were Palestinians who managed to remain, were not displaced. Between 1948, at the end of the war, and 1966, Israel, the so-called only democracy in the Middle East, had imposed a military regime, a military dictatorship really, on its Palestinian population. In fact, in the whole history of Israel, there has only been 1 year, 1966, where Israel hasn't imposed an official military regime, a military dictatorship on at least part of its Palestinian population, because immediately after 1966, in 1967, Israel opens what is called what in Israel is called the Six-Day War, in which it occupied the Syrian Golan, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, and immediately imposes a military dictatorship on Palestinians living in these regions. The population of Gaza today is between 70 and 80, is composed of between 70 and 80% of refugees from refugees and their descendants from 1948. The reason that that Mohammed had also felt very lucky, but had also felt remorse for leaving, is that a very important part of the Palestinian ethos is that of surviving the ethnic cleansing of 1947 and the occupation of the ethnic cleansing of 1948 and the occupation of 1967, and to leave is to relive that experience again and again. Throughout the war, throughout Israel's attack on Gaza in recent months, Israel has used the memory of the Nakba to pressure Palestinians away from areas that it wanted to occupy. Israeli officials had even declared what is happening in Gaza as a second Nakba. Now, the situation in Gaza, even before the war, was catastrophic. So we're not talking about, an ordinary place that suddenly is being bombed, or that suddenly undergoes some transformation because of the war. Israeli policy for years had been to isolate the Gaza Strip and dominate it through its isolation and through its through poverty and through dispossession. That process had begun in the early 90s, in the mid-early 90s, with the construction of a barrier around Gaza as part, believe it or not, as what Israel tried to market the world as a peace process, the Oslo Accords. And in '94, Israel had started surrounding the Strip with a barrier, then it was mostly a fence. Before the Oslo Accords, people could travel more or less freely between Gaza the West Bank, and 48. Maybe just I'll stop for a second and maybe explain some ground terms. So the part that is officially recognized as Israel, we often refer to as either the inside or 48, and that's how I'll refer to it in this talk. And then there's the West Bank that Israel, which was between 48 and 1967, was under Jordanian rule, and Gaza was, in that time, Gaza was under Egyptian rule, and they were occupied in 67, and that's why that's the source of the division in terms between the parts of Palestine that Israel has occupied in 48, we call them 48, and the parts of Palestine that Israel had occupied in 1967, and I'll refer to them as 67 or Gaza and the West Bank. So until the Oslo Accord, until the so-called peace process, movement between Gaza and the West Bank and Gaza and 48 was relatively free. It doesn't mean that there weren't any restrictions, but the rule was that generally you could move around. Since the Oslo Accords, there began a process of segregating Gaza away from the rest of Palestine. Starting with a wall, then with expanding and intensifying the siege with time, and then in the mid 2000s, Israel declares that it will pull out of the Gaza Strip and evacuate all the settlements that are there. I didn't mention that since the 70s, Israel had started constructing settlements in the Jewish-only settlements, colonies really, in the West Bank and in Gaza. And in the mid-2000s, Israel had announced that it will pull out from the Gaza Strip and evacuate all settlements there. As far as Israel is concerned, as far the way that Israel tries to market it to the world, that was the end of Israeli occupation, the end of Israeli rule over Gaza. That is a lie, of course. Israel controls Gaza through siege. It decides what goes in and goes out. There's actually, the Israeli government has actually made a very detailed list of the food that is allowed to enter Gaza and what is suitable diet, a minimal suitable diet for Palestinians, 1,800 calories. And that, based on the calculation of the population in Gaza, that is the allocation of food that is allowed to go into Gaza, not during the war, in ordinary times. Through siege, through control of the naval space, and through control of the aerial space. Already in 2015, the vast majority of drinking water, of underground water in Gaza was deemed unsuitable for drinking due to salting. That is long before the war. There's been like I said, there's been a food crisis ever since, and there's a power crisis, a constant power crisis in Gaza. It is the world's largest open-air prison, has been for years, and long before the war. We're talking about 2.3 million people in the Gaza Strip that have been living on the verge of catastrophe for years, for decades, even before the war. After October 7th, when Hamas, the forces led by Hamas invaded 48 and the settlements surrounding Gaza, Israel had retaliated by announcing war on the Gaza Strip and on Palestinians in general. I think that most of you probably follow the news and are aware of what is going on in the Gaza Strip. I won't go into that in length. I think that what I can offer is probably a more nuanced analysis of Israeli society, of the trends within Israeli society, and a little bit about what's happening in 48, repression in 48, in the West Bank and in prison and in the prisons, which is something that we hardly hear about at all. What I would like to go into, because there seems to be a discussion about whether what is happening in Gaza, is it a genocide? Is it not genocide? Does it amount to genocide? And I think that this ongoing argument reflects on our political failure, because it had been reduced. Genocide is a political term. Anything that we use to understand reality is first and foremost a political term, and then sometimes maybe also a legal term. And that this argument of what is happening in Gaza, is it genocide, is it crimes against humanity, is it something else, had been reduced to legal arguments, and by doing that, it is moved away from the realm of what ordinary people like us can talk about into the realm of experts who will discuss whether bombing a 12-story house to kill one person is okay. Is it justifiable under the international rules of law? What Israel is very good at is at slicing reality into very, very small pieces of time, and then judging these artificial slices through a lens of legal advice. There's a very, very large division within the Israeli army in charge of legal advice, of inspecting, of looking over military action and approving it, making sure that it is within the confines of international law. That's bullshit. That's bullshit because reality isn't sliced to this chair being here and that person being there, and everything in between just doesn't exist. What Israel is doing in Gaza is genocide in the simplest terms that we all understand. In the simplest terms, since October 7th, Israel has killed more than 1.5% of the Gaza Strip's population. Israeli society had undergone an insane shift to the right, a genocidal shift to the right, that continues an ongoing trend within Israeli politics. But what was hidden before is out in the open now. And what's out in the open now is open genocidal discourse at all levels. From the person in the street, from the very beginning of the war, what you would hear people saying is erase Gaza, eliminate Gaza, exterminate Gaza. Gazans would be referred to as human animals, as subhumans. A very popular slogan still is zero residents in Gaza.
Excuse me, popular amongst who?
The public.
The public, okay.
I mean, I wish I could limit it to specific segments within Israeli society, but it's so widespread that saying it's only within these segments or only within these segments would simply be a lie. Media commentators, the same. Openly, Israeli media regularly and openly calls for genocide. They wouldn't call it genocide, but they call for genocide. Extermination, killing, no innocent people. Just a few weeks ago, a very prominent commentator in the Israeli media commented that the Israeli response to October 7th should have been 100,000 Palestinians dead within the first day. That we are being solved. Now, genocide isn't just according to international law, which I'm no expert on, but I know enough to say this. Genocide isn't limited to the actual act. There's also just as severe as is incitement to genocide, and Israel is a signatory to the anti-genocide convention. It's in fact incorporated into Israel's domestic law. Generally speaking, there isn't capital punishment in Israel. There is an Israeli military law that's valid. But that's aside. In Israeli penal code, there isn't capital punishment except for the crime of the Nazis. That Israel has universal jurisdiction in internal law over the crime of the Nazis and has capital punishment for that. Sedition and genocide. Now, suffice to say, that commentator who called for killing 100,000 people, which of course can't be targeted, wasn't tried for incitement for genocide, right? It's not only that he wasn't tried for incitement to genocide, he remains on air and keeps on advocating for genocide. There's absolutely no repercussions for incitement to genocide within Israeli society. And it's not only the public and the media, it's also very prominent politicians. From the so-called, and I like to highlight the so-called part, from the so-called left of Israeli society to its extreme right. The Israeli president had said that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. He's formerly the head of the Labour Party. Israel's Minister of War, Gallant, had, at the beginning of the war, had declared that there will be complete siege over the Gaza Strip. No food will come in, no water will come in, and no gas will come in. There will be no power. And this isn't empty talk, right? He declared siege, and then there was complete siege until the U.S. forced Israel to let in a little bit of aid, very little aid. It is Israeli policy to wage war on the civilian population through hunger. And there is severe hunger in Gaza. There is literally famine in Gaza, especially in the north, but all throughout the Gaza Strip. The situation is so bad that people are drinking contaminated water, that people are drinking salted water from the sea and from underground salted water, that people are reduced to eating leaves, grass, fodder, animal fodder, make bread out of animal fodder, and even that is now running out. Israel had pushed the entire population of the Gaza Strip into Rafah. Rafah is a very small town. It's not very small, but it's about 200,000 people originally, and it is extremely crowded, was extremely crowded even before the war. Nowadays, the estimations are that between 1.4 and 1.8 million people reside in Rafah. And Israel now threatens to invade that area as well. Where these people should go, no one knows, because the Gaza Strip has completely destroyed and has no place to host these people. The north is completely demolished. It is estimated that between 70 and 80% of the structures have been damaged to a degree that they're unlivable. Infrastructure is completely ruined. There's no running water, sewage, etc. There simply is nowhere to go. The only place left to go, well, there are two places left to go. One of them is an area, a very small agricultural area called the Muasi. Muasi used to be, is where several Israeli settlements used to be, and is now an agricultural area. It's about 20 square kilometers. Even if people stand like sardines, one next to each other, it cannot host that many people. And the other alternative is Egypt. Now, Egypt officially opposes the passage of Palestinians to Egypt, but it is official Israeli policy that is the best thing for Israel. I know it sounds like a conspiracy, but you don't have to believe me. It's, like I said, it's official Israeli policy. There are state documents about that policy made by the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence, weighing several options of what can be done with the Palestinian population in Gaza. And that was the chosen option, to try and have them be pushed away to Gaza. That echoes politicians' ongoing threats of a second Nakba in Gaza, and of referring to what is happening as a second Nakba. It is worth mentioning that Egypt had already prepared an area next to the border. Rafah is actually a city split. Half of it is in Palestine, in Gaza, and half of it is in Egypt. And on the Egyptian side of the border, Egypt had erected, in recent days, walled off an area that could host Palestinian refugees fleeing from an Israeli invasion into Gaza, because simply there's no other place to run. So I'm no legal expert. I don't know if legally, under the conventions, if Israel is able to whitewash what it does as something else other than genocide. But in layman terms, in political terms, what else can we call threats to eliminate people that are then followed by policy, which is then followed by action? 1.5% of the Gaza Strip's population had been eliminated. More than 12,000 of them, 12,000 children, have been killed in this time. More than 8,000 women, not the children and not the women, are combatants. The majority of the rest of the people who were killed were not combatants. If that is not genocide, then we are all in need for a new language, because our language means nothing if that is not genocide. So I'd like to stop for a second here and ask if anyone has questions, and then I'll continue. Great. So I'd like to speak a little bit about Israeli society and what's it been undergoing in recent years and specifically in recent months. So, like I said, the history of Israel is a history of colonialism. It's a history of colonialism of Palestinian land and of the Palestinian people, the subjugation of the Palestinian people. In past years, in past decades, Israel has been undergoing, begun from a very right-wing position and had been undergoing a constant shift to the right, especially in the younger population. Now, I'd like to say something about the basic Palestinian experience of life. The basic Palestinian experience of life is one of complete insecurity. You never know if, when going from point A to point B, you will be arrested at an Israeli checkpoint. You never know if Israeli settlers will raid your town, shooting, killing someone, injuring someone, just beating someone. You never know if the Israeli army is gonna come at the dead of night and arrest your children, or maybe just map where everyone lives and who's related to who. You never know if the military commander will decide to place you under administrative arrest or try you. There is a very fundamental sense of insecurity. And I'm not only talking about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I'm not only talking about what's usually referred to as occupation. Palestine in general, from the north to the south, from the Jordan River to the sea, there is but one regime, and that is the Israeli regime of apartheid. And it has several faces. But the basic Palestinian experience is one of fear and of fundamental insecurity. And it might be a bit, cheap psychology. But what I think happened, one of the significant things that happened to Israeli society on October 7th, is that for one day, it had experienced an insecurity that is similar to the Palestinian experience, general experience of life. And that insecurity, and it's fucking scary to be Palestinian under Israeli rule. And I'm sure that October 7th was fucking scary for anyone who faced what happened. And that experience of insecurity drove Israeli society completely insane, genocidally insane. Everything that I described before. And in the wake of that experience, everything is allowed. In the wake of that experience, Israeli settlers in the West Bank have openly published their plans, their long existing plans, of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. Since October 7th, at least 16 or 18 communities have been ethnically cleansed in the West Bank by Israeli settlers and the army. The Israeli settlers and the army are one in the West Bank. Before October 7th, before the war, we used to say that the army and settlers work hand in hand. After the war, the settlers are the army. It is an even more frightening situation. What is happening in Gaza in the wake of October 7th, you all know. And what is happening in 48 is a campaign of repression unprecedented since military rule ended in 1966, perhaps even before it. There have been hundreds of arrests for virtually nothing. An Instagram influencer, a very apolitical person, usually, posted a few days after the war began, posted, I don't know, what are they called in Instagram? Posts? I'm not very strong on in social media. Posted a post saying, "Qalbi ma ulad Gaza," my heart is with the children of Gaza. He was arrested for incitement and held in jail. A Palestinian political analyst from the south of Palestine, from the Nakab, published political analysis of what is going to happen. Like that was in the early stages of the war. How Israel might invade, like it was before the land invasion to the Strip, and he was offering analysis of how Israel might invade the Strip. Something that Israeli media did openly all the time in Hebrew. He was arrested and in suspicion of aiding the enemy at time of war for political analysis. Now, in court, his lawyer said, "Yeah, but here, it's published in Hebrew all the time. Like, just like, have you questioned these journalists? No, that's in Hebrew." It's so ridiculous that it's funny, but it's a level of repression that is ridiculous. We like before we came here, I saw that people are being arrested in Russia and are being sent to 12 or 15 days in jail for illegal assembly. And in my imaginary thinking, Russia is a place of unimaginable repression, and it is a place of unimaginable repression. But just a week and a half ago, a friend of mine was released after being arrested at a demonstration in Al-Fahm, which is a fairly large Palestinian city at the center of Palestine. And he was held in jail for 4 months for holding a protest and shouting slogans that we've all been shouting ever since the 70s. He's a lawyer himself, and another comrade is still held in prison for participating in that same demonstration. There have been hundreds of arrests in 48, just like that. Almost all of them for speech. In the West Bank, there have been more than, based on Israeli numbers, more than 3,200 arrests since the beginning of the war. The number of Palestinian prisoners is now above 11,000 prisoners. The majority of those arrested since the war had been arrested on something Israel calls administrative detention. Administrative detention is euphemism. It sounds very administrative and clean, but what administrative detention actually is imprisonment without trial, without charge, on secret evidence, on secret suspicions even. You're picked up, the military commander signs a warrant, and that's it. You're not told what you've done, what you may have done. what is the evidence against you? There's no even semblance of due process, nothing. You just sit in jail. Administrative detention is indefinite. It can be a warrant, and administrative detention is a warrant can be for up to 6 months, but it can be renewed every time, again, with absolutely no due process, no judicial review. Now, another thing that we have that sounds a little bit weird is something that even South Africa didn't have during apartheid. We have two separate systems of law. As what Israel would consider a Jewish citizen, I'm not very comfortable in placing myself in that situation, but as a Jewish citizen of Israel, I would be tried in a normal Israeli court. When I'm arrested in the West Bank together with a Palestinian comrade at the same demonstration, grabbed together, same charges, same exact circumstances, I have a much larger criminal past than my comrade has. I would be tried, I would be processed through the Israeli system, through the civilian system, under Israeli penal code. That means that I see a judge within 24 hours, for instance. That's a luxury. My judge will be a civilian. The penal code that I'd be tried under is actually law. It's voted on in parliament. And under military law, you wait 8 days until you see a judge. Under military law, almost every offense in the book is punishable by 10 years or more. Illegal assembly, which in Israel is punishable by up to 3 years, is punishable by up to 10 years in military law. And the level of evidence and what consists illegal assembly are not the same. Because in the West Bank, illegal assembly is any meeting of more than 10 people discussing a political issue. We are an illegal assembly right now under Israeli military law. And now that division of who gets tried under which law is on ethnic grounds. As a Jewish Israeli, I would be tried under civil law. Palestinian residents of the West Bank would be tried under military law.
But you tried. You tried to be also there.
I did try.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
Yeah.
Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, by law they're Israeli citizens, just like I am, are also sometimes tried under military law. Israeli settlers who live and work in the West Bank, arrested in the West Bank, they're tried under Israeli civil law. What's your name?
Leona.
Like Leona said, and like I told you, I've just finished a year in jail house arrest. And when my trial opened, I was arrested in the West Bank on suspicion of stone throwing at a demonstration against settlements. When my trial opened, I said, look, under Israeli law, you can try me in a military court. All my Palestinian comrades are tried in military court. Palestinians who are citizens, who have Israeli citizenship, are also tried in military court. And I brought precedent. Go ahead, try me in military court. The answer was nah. Literally, that was the answer. Nah, we're not going to do that. And that was even before the war. And like I said, there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of arrests in recent months, most of them administrative detention. The estimation is between 60 to 80% of the people arrested have been placed under administrative detention, arrested in the West Bank. And the situations in the prisons is catastrophic. It is in the same way that what is happening in Gaza is unprecedented in Palestine's history. And Palestine had known its fair share of massacres. What is happening now is unprecedented. What is happening in the prisons is unprecedented as well. Since the war began, 9 prisoners have been killed by Israeli wardens. At least 9, more than 9. We know of 9 by name. However, there are thousands of prisoners arrested, of hostages taken from Gaza, and they're held separately in a facility at the south of Israel. And Israel releases no information about them. We don't know their names. We don't know the exact number. Their families as well. No one knows. Several petitions to the High Court in regards to their situation, identity, anything, any information, what they're suspected of, have all been dismissed. The Israeli army had admitted to the press that several hostages were killed, but we don't know how many and under what circumstances. So we do know about 9 prisoners who've been killed, prisoners from the West Bank. And the last of them was actually today, killed in the Nafha prison. He's from a region called Tubas. And there have been autopsies, and there have been signs of beating and of medical neglect, but no one's been punished. Officially, no reason have been given for their death yet, none of them. There's no food in the prisons. The food had been limited to a bowl of rice for every 2 prisoners and an egg. That's your ration for the day. I can tell you from experience that food wasn't great in Israeli prison before, but it was not like that. There's no electricity. There's electricity between 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. and then it's cut off. There's water 1 hour a day, and it's the same hour that you get yard time. So you either shower or you get yard time. Prisoners are allowed 1 set of clothes, only what's on their body, so they can't wash. Cells that used to hold 6 people, and which the Israeli Supreme Court had ruled that are so overcrowded that they are considered inhumane, now hold 13 people. And beatings are an everyday occurrence. Every friend of mine that is being released from jail, it is the same story. One friend of mine lost 14 kilos in 3 months. Another friend of mine lost 20 kilos in 4 months. They were all beaten all the time. I was on the phone with our lawyer yesterday because one of my friends was brought back into interrogation after being held for a week. He was held in the Russian compound. It's a notorious jail and interrogation center. He was beaten all over his body, threatened, and is literally afraid for his life if he returns to the Russian compound. He didn't care what happens to him, how long in jail he gets. His single wish was just, please don't let me go back to the Russian compound. That's the situation in Israeli jails. Of course, Israel prevents the Red Cross from entering Israeli jails and supervise. The same thing it complains that Hamas wouldn't do, wouldn't allow for Israeli hostages. I would like to say that there's hope within Israeli society for a change, but that would be lying. The situation right now within Israeli society is that any talk of any pro-Palestinian talk, any discourse that even considers Palestinian human is considered betrayal. It's considered treachery. And I think that leads us a little bit to talk a little bit about politics, and I'd be very happy if this part is more of a discussion than me talking at the room. I'd like to start with the proceeding in the International Court of Justice. There are two separate proceedings now. One ongoing these days about the legality of Israeli occupation, 1967 occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the previous ongoing procedure about the South Africa's case against Israel for genocide. I think that the decision, the interim decision, it was a sham. It's shameful that the court determined that there is plausible fear that genocide is being committed, but it did not order a ceasefire. However, I don't think that anyone who has even a little bit of experience with this institution expected a ceasefire. And I think, unfortunately, politics is often what we can do with the little we have, especially left-wing politics. And the little we do have from this decision is, first, it exposes the ineptitude of international law and of the human rights discourse that has taken over the left with the flourishing, with the explosion of NGO culture. It replaced a discourse of liberation. We've given discourse of liberation and traded it for an empty discourse of human rights. And if there is an example of that discourse failing, it is that decision. So it gives us that, but it also gives us the determination that it is plausible that genocide is taking place in Palestine. And like I said before, anyone who has eyes should be able to see that genocide, that killing 1.5% of the population is genocide, that destroying infrastructure, that targeting the civilian population, that telling the civilian population to move from one place to another to a safe area, and then bombing them continuing to bomb them with one-ton bombs. The New York Times recently published an investigative piece about how more than 800 one-ton bombs were dropped by Israel on areas that should be considered safe. So we have the legal stamp of approval that genocide is plausibly being committed in Palestine. What does that mean? If there's no ceasefire, what does that mean? What do we make of that? How can we make that mean something? So one important thing is that the International Court of Justice, that's considered the world court, international law jurisprudence, case law. It's considered like one of the foundations of international law. And it gives us the opportunity to take some legal action in a slightly creative manner. Because genocide is not just another crime under international law. It's like the capital and assisting genocide in any way or failing to prevent genocide is not as bad as genocide, but almost. So it allows us to litigate. It allows us to strategize on creating pressure. There has been in the U.S. there's been a case in a federal court where people petitioned against the Biden administration, demanding that it stop sending military aid to Israel, and the court ruled that U.S. foreign policy is not within its jurisdiction, but reiterated in a U.S. court that it is plausible that genocide is taking place in Palestine. A Dutch court recently forced the Dutch government to stop supply F-35 parts to Israel. That is very important. It is under appeal. And it is an avenue of action that can be taken. But again, that's in the realm of experts. I think that it is also an opportunity, at least an equal opportunity, for action on the ground. And the one most urgent thing that needs to be done right now is stop the genocide, no doubt. That if we can do only one thing, yeah, that's the one thing that needs to be done. And criticizing international law and talking about liberation versus human rights, that's all fine and interesting, but it's not important. We need to stop the genocide. But what we also must do, what our debt to Palestine is not stop and ending the genocide. We must ensure that we start talking about liberation, that we start talking about a decolonialization of Palestine, to view Palestinians not only as victims of genocide that need to be saved, but as an actual political people with agency that deserve liberation, that deserve support for the struggle for liberation and decolonialization from the river to the sea. Thank you. And I'm not from here. Like, you all know a lot more about local politics and what can be done and what the ways to act and the way to move and what's legally possible in litigation and what. So like my ability to offer avenues of action is very slim and really quite ridiculous. So I'd be really happy if this was more of a conversation of what can be done and how what avenues of action can be taken, and maybe also to discuss the idea of what liberation means in this context of colonialization and decolonialization, and how can it be supported.
It's okay. I would be really interested to hear more about this decolonial activism that you have been doing, and how is it possible in this kind of political environment and with all the repression? How do people inside Israeli citizens manage to organize?
Okay. So my framework of activism isn't Israeli society, and I wouldn't call myself an Israeli activist. I work within the Palestinian movement. I strive to be part of the Palestinian movement. Now, of course, I enjoy the privilege of being considered a Jewish Israeli by the state. Like I said, I'm tried in an ordinary court. Even when I ask them to, they won't try me in a military court. But politically, I believe that living in Palestine, the political action should be under the umbrella of the Palestinian movement, as part of the Palestinian movement. And it's a good question. How is that possible? It was a good question before the war. How is it possible to transgress the boundaries of colonialism? How is it possible to come from the settler society and move away from it? And I will always be part of the problem. I hope to also be able part of the movement for liberation. It is an even better question of how will that be possible after the genocide? What will the movement look like after a genocide? It is an event so traumatic that, I ask myself if there will be a place for me in the movement, and if the answer is no, that is understandable. Under the circumstances, it would be personally immensely sad for me. But as for your question about Israeli society, there isn't really a left to speak about within Israeli society. Like I said, I kept on saying the so-called Israeli left, and that's for a reason. There is, pockets of Jewish Israeli citizens who oppose the war, but it is so politically insignificant in numbers and influence that it really should be considered a rounding error more than a political movement. The third point is that Israel is an apartheid state, so repression by its nature is directed more towards Palestinians than towards people the state considers to be Jewish. It's Jewish citizens. So the price that I pay and the price that my Palestinian comrades pay is of no comparison.
Just a technical note: we have now the stream, so all the questions are going to online and the recording. But we will switch it off at some point, and then if someone wants to ask off the record, we can do that.
And I'm also here if you want to come and ask questions afterwards.
I have many questions, but I'm not going to do the interview like this. So do you feel like it's your kind of responsibility to use your privilege? What you have stated that you have clearly?
I think we should be very conscious to white savior complex. I have privilege, I'll come and save you, and I know the way. I think that anyone who wants to be part of the struggle for liberation, it's on us to find the ways to join the movement. It isn't on the Palestinian movement to incorporate us into it. We need to find ways into the Palestinian movement. And I wouldn't speak about it in terms of, what was the word you used? Before, my responsibility.
Yeah.
I don't think of politics that way. I think of politics as as the fabric of life. I can't imagine a life that is different, that isn't intertwined with activism and with struggle. That's really all, throughout my my adult life, since I've been a very, very small teenage boy, that has always been how I interacted with life. So yeah, I don't like that view of activism in terms of altruism. I think that's just how we live. Like activism in politics is how we live our lives.
But most people don't. That's the thing. Some of us might, but that's why I was just kind of, you don't really. I've read about you and what you've been doing and living, but many people might not be so engaged and willing to take risks and or feel the solidarity and want to work with Palestinians, for example, and not be saving them. But I'm just thinking about when we talk about privilege more and more, I think that maybe it could be a way to get some people to act kind of like, okay, now I'm more safe because of this or that. Now I might take a stand.
Yeah, well, look, at the end of the day, bullets don't differentiate, right?
No, yeah.
So when you're hit by a bullet, it doesn't matter.
You're in Israel, right?
Your like the color of your skin doesn't really matter that much. The chances that you'll get shot are lower, but soldiers from far away at the demonstration, it's very hard for them to distinguish who's who. It's more about what you do than who you are. Capitalism has us pinned down to privilege, to profit, to comfort, to a false idea of what comfort is. That's not a problem that's specific to Palestine, I think. I think we all need to rise up.
Well, since we're in this event organized by A-ryhmä, I was wondering if you have anything to say about what anarchist perspective on this could be, which is not just in the realm of maybe philosophically interesting. And well, you said very clearly that we need to stop the genocide and we'll talk about liberation after. But is there anything like anarchist analysis or action or anything can bring into this, or anything in this that you find relevant? Or
I think, well, again, I can speak more of Palestine than of here because
not here in general.
Yeah, in general, I think that anarchist principles of organizing are very efficient in organizing under repression. That they've been formed for that. Small groups, non-hierarchical, loose organizations. They're less susceptible to crackdown. Now, nothing is 100% perfect. I mean, a small amount of people will crack under the weight of the state, no doubt. No matter how organized or in what manner we are organized in. But I think organizationally it's a suitable model of organization, and I think in an anarchist analysis of colonialism is also interesting in Palestine, because one of the things that Israel is trying to do very successfully is the segregation of different Palestinian political groups away from each other based on geography and based on like political status, refugee, subject, resident, citizen. They're all living in the diaspora. There are all sorts of these fragmented groups within Palestinian society, and I think a holistic view of colonialism and of power and of the perception of power as something that tries to mold reality rather than a perception of power as something beneficial in the service of society that, oops, just went wrong in some way, and you know, like it got twisted into something that's bad, but we just need to fix it and shift it back into the right course. I think it provides a better understanding of the inner mechanisms of how capitalism, militarism, colonialism, and all these other isms work in an intertwined way in Palestine, on how Israel uses them to subjugate Palestinian and to perpetuate its colonialism. I hope that's not too.
I want clarification on it.
Yeah.
Very good. But what is the concept? Given that, how do you negotiate desires for sovereignty of a people?
The what?
The desire for sovereignty of a people. If a people wants to become something, how do you negotiate it? It's an impossible question, but
you know, anarchism is many things, but in my version of anarchism, the national liberation struggle, anarchists have no problem in supporting a national liberation struggle as long as it's a struggle. And I think, you know, we can have grand ideas, but at the end of the day, people are not interested in ideas for the sake of ideas, but rather are interested in the liberation and freedom that they provide. And I don't think that we can ignore a people's national aspirations or aspirations for self-determination. I think maybe with a historic example. I have a very good friend who was part of the struggle in South Africa. And we've had an argument about the post-apartheid structure, political structure in South Africa. And I said that I think that the worst mistake that the ANC did as a liberation organization was to form a government. Not that a government was formed to replace apartheid, because in reality, as anarchist as I want to be, that was a step that had to be taken at a concrete point in time for the apartheid regime to fall. But for the ANC as a liberation organization, and I think for almost any liberation organization, to take power is the ultimate mistake. Because liberation, being the liberation organization, has an ethos to it that gives you too much power, even in the standards of ordinary democratic ideas, not even anarchist ideas. But you know, if we shit, I forgot his name. The Italian bank robber who died a few years ago, anarchist bank robber. Yeah, Bonanno. He wrote a pamphlet about anarchism in the national liberation struggle, which I really like. And he basically says, as long as it's a liberation struggle, anarchists belong there. And once it's over, we belong on the other side. And I think that's a generally good idea about anarchism, that we're not. Communists have this idea of after the revolution, and we don't have that, right? In a way, I think anarchism is even a counter-revolutionary ideology, because there isn't a moment where everything is perfect. My view of anarchism is that there's always that struggle is always in process. There's always a revolution needing to take place, and that nothing will ever be perfect. We make one step, and then we continue on struggling for the other, and many times we'll be pushed a few steps back, and then we need to keep on pushing forward. And I think that's my answer about the context of national liberation.
Very generous answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm here if anyone wants to talk away from the microphone. And yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope it's been helpful not only in understanding what's happening, but also in trying to think about what can be done. And I'd like to stress that, you know, everything that I said is my point of view of things, which is limited. I've never been to Gaza. I can't go into Gaza. I don't actually know what people in Gaza don't know and can't know what people in Gaza are undergoing. It's pretty bad for me to be speaking in their name, but the situation is bad enough for this to warrant it.